Welcome everyone to the MMA Vivisection. I am Zane Simon, joined as always by Connor Rebish. We
Hello.
are here to talk about UFC on Fox 24, Demetrious Johnson versus Wilson Hayes. And whether or not you care about Demetrious Johnson a whole lot, also one of the better top to bottom UFC cards this year.
Yeah,
Really.
and pretty easily one of the best Fox cards I think they've done from top to bottom. It's got contenders, it's got blue chip prospects, it's got the best fighter in the sport right now. It's got everything.
Yeah, it's a fight where you really have to get down to the fight past prelims to find a fight that doesn't mean a whole lot.
Yeah, or that is like flat out easy to pick.
Even then, yeah. Like I did a lot of tape study and stuff for this yesterday, doing the Sure Dog Roundtable, and pretty much the only thing studying tape did for me really was make fights I thought I knew how to pick harder to pick.
Yeah, I know what you mean.
It didn't help much at all for this card. So, nonetheless, as hard as I feel like it is, I'm also seeing a lot of unanimity out there among analysts for fight picks that they're making. So I'm going to be interested to see where we fall along that as well. I'm hoping that we don't have a lot of unanimity because I need to fucking catch up on you in our.
I finally pulled more than 2 picks ahead. Extended that to a 7-point lead.
So.
It was all about that Thiago Alves pick, man. I was the most proud of that one because no one was picking Thiago Alves over Patrick Cote.
Yeah, that was a mistake. That's like I haven't even seen the fight, but every bit of commentary I've seen stemming out of it suggested that was a big mistake on my part.
Can't you? It's like one of those fights where it happens, and then in retrospect, you're like, oh, of course.
Yeah, I mean, and the thing for me was when I picked it, I knew Thiago Alves is a better technical fighter than Patrick Cote. It was just all about trusting whether I trusted Alves' durability.
Yeah, well, there's always many layers that go into a fight pick. Also, the battle that people see us fighting on this show all the time, where we're just like going through 7 circles of over rationalization and like making ourselves doubt our gut instincts, and then wondering if our doubts are really just doubts or if they're better judgment, or you have no idea sometimes when you put too much pressure on yourself to pick. So it's best, I think, just to go with a feel. You know the fighters, just go by feel. That's the way to do it.
And it's been like this all year for me, but fights like Chris Weidman versus Gegard Mousasi, Patrick Cummings, Jan Blachowicz, like it's clear I had the right idea.
Yeah, no doubt.
But then,
especially with Cummings, Blachowicz, holy shit, Patrick Cummings survived about 19 knockouts in that first round. You were very close to being right on that one.
And it's just then it's all wrenched back from the brink and laid out before me as a massive failure. So, oh well. Let's dive right back into this UFC on Fox 24 card before we get too far out. And first fight up on the card, women's bantamweight bout: Ashlee Evans-Smith versus Ketlen Vieira.
Let's not do the thing we usually do, where we go on way too long about the first fight.
Okay.
Ketlen Vieira, kind of a brawler on the feet. She looked a lot more patient and controlled in her UFC debut, but she also, despite slowing her pace, gassed pretty badly in the 3rd round of that fight, even though it wasn't really a crazily paced fight up to that point. So that's going to be an issue for her going forwards. I think to beat someone like Ashlee Evans-Smith, who is a rudimentary but improving striker, Ketlen Vieira would need to take her down to the ground. And that's going to be difficult to begin with because Ashlee Evans-Smith is a very solid wrestler. And I think Ashlee Evans-Smith may also have an advantage on the ground, just being a more positionally oriented grappler. So I think Ashlee Evans-Smith is going to slowly take over this fight, starting from the very first bell. I like her by 3rd round TKO. Yeah,
the general thing I've seen with Ashlee Evans-Smith is that, basically, unless you can just kind of catch her sleeping, and you are a much more dangerous fighter, she's gonna probably win just by being big and tough because she's she's flashy from range, not nearly as effective as she is flashy. And she's a pretty good clinch fighter and a very good ground and pound top control fighter. She just occasionally tends to kind of fall asleep at the wheel in terms of focusing on what her opponent might be able to do to her in any situation. But you have to actually be able to do stuff to her to make that work. And Ketlen Vieira looks like the kind of fighter who can be big and tough and out-brawl and sort of outwork somebody, but not the kind of fighter who's just going to flash KO someone or suddenly jump on a position and link up a sub and choke somebody out in a heartbeat. So I don't really see her slowly breaking down Evan Smith, who's bigger and tougher.
Yep.
Odds on that fight, Evan Smith is the favorite opening at about -170 and drifting out to -183. And Ketlen Vieira opening at +130, drifting out to +153. That feels right, and like the odds are even going in the right direction.
Yep.
Would be a reasonable upset if Vieira won that fight, but Evan Smith isn't any kind of like dynamic, high-end technical fighter who should dominate.
I'm with you.
All right, that brings us to a welterweight bout: Zak Cummings versus Nathan Coy. And Coy is a sneaky, much better than you'd expect, maybe, wrestle grappler. I don't know, maybe much better than you'd expect. It's what he's been his whole career. But he's more technical than you might expect for a guy that, for a lot of fans, wouldn't have heard of. He's been around a long time. He's got a lot of fights under his belt.
He's the very definition of a gritty wrestler.
Yeah. He does not take punches well at all. He really reacts poorly to getting hit. And Cummings has been a really strong wrestle grappler who has developed a diversified power striking arsenal to go with it. So unless Coy can show that he really has Cummings' number on the ground, then I think this is a pretty dominant win for Cummings, where his stand-up is just much better refined and he takes shots better. And the only person who has controlled him in any way on the ground has been Gunnar Nelson, and that's Gunnar Nelson.
Right, yeah. Zak Cummings, always underrated, man. He's still one of the dark horses at welterweight. He's a power puncher with good timing. He's got really good awareness. It takes a very technical striker to actually catch Zak Cummings off guard. Really, the only time that's been done is by the crazy explosive Gunnar Nelson and the very technical and precise Santiago Ponzinibbio. But against your average opponent, Zak Cummings can read their strikes as they come. He can land counters. He can cut them off. He's got a really underrated kicking game as well. Just an all-around, very good, sort of natural-seeming kickboxer for MMA. And then you combine that with the fact that he's a solid defensive wrestler who could very well wrap Nathan Coy's neck up if Coy is forced to go for a takedown after being hurt, because, of course, Zak Cummings has a number of wins by guillotine and Darce choke. He's got a great front headlock game, which is a classic counter to the wrestler's shot. So I think more than likely he will get Nathan Coy out of there on the feet, but hurting Nathan Coy and grabbing a submission would not surprise me either. I'm taking Zak Cummings by second round TKO.
Odds on that fight: Cummings is coming in as a pretty heavy favorite. He opened at -200, has drifted out to -400, where he's stabilized. And Coy opening at +200, drifting out to +320. That feels honestly about right in this fight. Coy would have to, he does not have any easy paths to victory.
Yeah, it feels a little wide to me, although I don't see an easy path for Coy to get a win here. He is a very experienced fighter. He's gritty. He may not take punches particularly well, but he's also a better striker than he seems, and he can mix that in with his wrestling pretty well. He
reminds me a lot of Patrick Cummings.
Yeah, very much so.
where it's like the mechanics of how he throws punches is not that bad. And actually, like, you see just that and you're like, yeah, this guy does all right. And then he gets hit and you're like, oh,
Yeah.
wow. You got hit really, really hard.
Yeah, to his credit, he's not quite as hittable as Patrick Cummings, who literally could not evade a single punch in the first round against Jan Blachowicz, as I alluded to earlier. But it will be difficult for Coy, and add to that the fact that he's 38 years old and he is starting to look it now. You know, he's starting to show his age, starting to like stretch out his knees before every round and just look a little stiffer than he used to. It's probably an easy win for Zak Cummings.
Yeah, the odds might be getting a little wide, but that also just means it doesn't look like there's anything to it that I would otherwise bet on. I don't know. Not that I bet. So what the hell ever. That brings us to a middleweight bout: Anthony Smith versus Andrew Sanchez.
This should be fun. Middleweights going at it. You know, I love me some middleweight action. Anthony Smith has well-documented problems as a mixed martial artist, namely that he flags really badly.
I thought you were going to talk about his tattoos.
They're not great, let's be honest. But even more profound a problem than that, the shame he feels whenever his opponent laughs at his tattoos is the fact that he tends to gas really badly, and more than just gassing, he really starts to break the moment he feels tired. He maybe made some nice strides in the direction of improving that in his last fight. He fought Elvis Mutapcic. He clearly lost the first round, and in the past that's usually been a recipe for Anthony Smith to lose the fight. But he had a nice comeback in round 2. He kept the pressure on. He used his strikes. It was maybe the fact that Mutapcic was hurt and staggering for most of the round that kept him from getting back into the fight. And again, I still wouldn't have been shocked if in the third round Anthony Smith had been just as weary as the guy whose face he was like landing dozens of punches on. So I think that's still an issue for him. That aside, he is a very capable striker. He's got long reach. He's uses his jab really well. He's vicious with the elbows and the clinch. Most likely, Andrew Sanchez is not going to have much difficulty taking Anthony Smith down. He used his last fight against Trevor Smith to work on his striking. It was pretty clear that he didn't really want to outgrapple a guy. He felt that it would be like a chance for him to sort of play around and get comfortable with his improving striking game. I would be shocked if he did the same thing here. Anthony Smith is a lot more dangerous than Trevor Smith on the feet, and also a lot easier to take down. Has pretty poor takedown defense, actually. So I expect Andrew Sanchez to pretty much nullify Anthony Smith's striking abilities by taking him down at the soonest opportunity in every round. And I think if Anthony Smith does tire out, we could very well see a submission or a TKO on the ground. I'm going to take a TKO. I think Andrew Sanchez is going to start working a little more on his MMA skills, not just his submission grappling. So I think we'll see like some ground and pound to a finish in the third round.
Yeah, I admit I have small worry about Andrew Sanchez in this fight, just because I do think that he wants to work on his striking in general every fight.
Yeah, if he does it for long periods here, he'll be in trouble.
And he also tends. I also worry a little in that Trevor Smith fight that like he fights well when he's tired, but he did get tired in that Trevor Smith fight, and I kind of feel like he's got a little bit of that Aljamain Sterling thing going on, where he's built a striking style that's fun and cool, but is really hard to maintain and like physically draining.
He has obviously based a lot of what he wants to do off of just fawning over Conor McGregor fights. That much is clear. Like the hop step right hand counter, the like lunging bolo uppercuts. He has very clearly studied Conor McGregor.
Yeah, and that does give me pause because Smith, for a round and a half, is a ferocious Muay Thai striker.
Yeah.
But he is so porous a takedown defender, so prone to gassing. Sanchez has, other than his loss to Kevin Casey, which is still going to haunt him for a little while, has been really tough. And I have to pick Sanchez here, but I do have a small bit of hesitation that if he just goes out there and he tries to be pretty and hop around and hands low, jumping in and out of range, Smith could absolutely catch him with something hard.
Yeah, no doubt. Smith is a very dangerous dude, but the thing you noted about Sanchez still sort of maintaining his composure when he gets tired, that's big. And the fact that he is a very big and strong middleweight with solid wrestling and grappling, it kind of gives you the impression that if he does end up in trouble, he can probably pretty easily transition and bring the fight to the ground where he will have a sizable advantage.
Yeah.
Smith has been really comfortable about letting the fight play out while he's playing guard, and that's not going to work so well against Sanchez.
No. Sanchez is the favorite, opening at -210, coming out to -311. Smith opening at +160, going out to +248. I don't have any real problem with those odds, but I don't think that I think they're as spot on as they could be. Like, there's no benefit to them at all.
Yeah, it might not be the craziest thing in the world to try and find, well, there are really no extra lines here.
Yeah.
It wouldn't be the craziest thing in the world if you could get a bookie to take a Smith by TKO, but the line would have to be pretty tempting, like upwards of +400.
Yeah, under 2.5 rounds at +100, that
maybe. Yeah, maybe. But, like if Sanchez wins, it could very well be a decision, and it's most likely going to be a Sanchez win. So
Andrew Sanchez has not, he's had a string of finishes against lower level opposition, but his 2 fights in the UFC against Khalil Roundtree and Trevor Smith, both of whom were tough, but they also ended up in decisions where Sanchez was kind of willing to just be grindy and point his way through a fight. So you don't necessarily want to take that as.
Yeah. Though, if we're playing the odds, it might be worth it to bet on this one going over 2.5, because Sanchez has quite a few late finishes in his record. Anthony Smith, quite a few late losses on his record. That might be worth a look. But at only +100, it's, not a big bet.
That's under 2.5. Over is minus.
Oh, yeah. Well, forget it. Drop it.
All right. That brings us to Devin Clark, Jake Collier. I'm going with Clark on this one. It's a bit of a toss-up for me.
Yeah, same.
You're really banking on Collier's a much more he has a lot more volume to his game. He's continually creating offense at all times, but it's really kind of to a fault. Like, he's the dude that will throw a 1-2 high kick, then immediately push to the clinch and try to throw knees, and then go for a takedown and won't get the takedown, and will pull guard for a leg lock, and just giving up. He will constantly give up range and position in pursuit of more offense in the moment, and it's gotten him hurt a lot. Alberto Uda was dialing him up before Collier came back and won that fight. Dong Yi Yang knocked him out. His fight with Ricardo Abreu was really tough.
Well, to be fair, I would say that Uda landed one really, really good strike. I wouldn't say he was like destroying Jake Collier. He just completely flattened his nose with a perfect knee.
Yeah, I thought that Uda was getting the better of that fight for most of the early going before the fact that Uda is just not a good athlete and tires himself out with his own strategy really came down hard on him. Collier's never had an easy fight in the UFC. He's never had a fight that looked like he was just dominant.
He lives and dies by the sword.
Yep. And Clark hasn't really either, but Clark is a natural light heavyweight and Collier is a middleweight moving up, and Clark is a great athlete. He may not take strikes as well as he could. He may not be able to strike at the pace he should because of his powerful physique and how his own desire not to tire himself out. But I just feel like he's going to be a little too big and powerful, and Collier is going to give him a little too much to work with. So I'm taking Clark here.
Yeah, I kind of like the fact that Jake Collier is moving up in weight here, because I think a problem for him. I mean, he's got a decent frame for the division. He's a long and tall guy. He could certainly looks like if he packed on a little extra muscle that he could cut a little bit of weight and make 205 very comfortably. And I think that might be nice for him because he tended to gas quite a bit at middleweight. He wanted to push a pace. He wanted to let his shots go. And it was not uncommon for him to wear himself out by like midway through the second round. Or even by the end of the first round, be breathing a little heavy because of the pace he likes to push. So I have hopes here that he can look pretty good at light heavyweight. I think the thing with Jake Collier is you're absolutely right about him just wanting to pour on the offense at all times. I don't think he's quite as like totally reckless with it as the other fighters we described that way, like Beck Rawlings, for example. You know, he's not just like a completely thoughtless offensive striker, but he does like to push the pace. He likes to mix up his strikes. He likes to hang around in striking range and just constantly look for opportunities to attack. He did show some nice improvements to his striking game. The spinning kick that he finished Alberto Udo with was nasty. Two really nice technical spinning back kicks, one of them from very close range, which is not something you tend to see from people who have kind of just picked that technique up. Collier did it really well. And I thought he moved his feet pretty well. I thought his combination punching looked pretty good. And he's not an amazing wrestler technically, but he's a pretty strong guy and he's got some decent instincts in the wrestling. Devin Clark definitely will have like an athleticism advantage, explosiveness, speed, and he will definitely be the better takedown artist. But I still have this feeling that Devin Clark has not quite gotten over the hump in his career where he's, you know, you remember the fight he had with, who's my crazy brawler, Alex Nicholson. And there were a lot of the kind of moments that Nicholson exploited to get that knockout, even in the fight with a very inactive Josh Stansbury. Like there were still a lot of moments where Clark, who is trying to get more comfortable with his striking but isn't quite there yet, would lunge in with two big shots and then just sort of take a picture after landing the right hand and just get nailed on the chin. And I think the scrappiness of Jake Collier is going to be dangerous. I think Jake Collier is essentially a slightly smarter Alex Nicholson. And while he could, like Alex Nicholson, drop most of the rounds, Nicholson was losing up to that point. I think he is probably even more capable of landing one of the shots, if a little less powerful. But the volume makes up for that. So I like Collier, actually, by second round TKO.
Yeah, I just think Collier may be less durable than Nicholson.
Yeah, definitely. He's been knocked out twice. He was hurt badly by Uda. He did well to fight through it, but he's now been like badly hurt in 3 of his UFC fights.
Yeah,
so you're right about that. But then again, I don't have a ton of faith in Devin Clark's chin either.
No, I don't at all. It should be a close, fun, scrappy action fight because I know Collier, if nothing else, he's not going to let Clark sit back and try and
no. I mean, if Clark wins, it'll be a great test that he has passed. Like it'll be a really impressive stride in his young career because it's the kind of fight he needs to win. Is someone who will push him, someone who will make it ugly, and he needs to prove basically that he can fight and not just sort of outclass somebody.
Yep. Clark opened at minus 150. Lines moved up and down quite a bit, but he's still at minus 143. So it hasn't, through all its changes, it's ended up right about where it started. Collier opened up at plus 110 and he dipped down into minus territory for a bit, but is back up at plus 119 now. He might be worth something as an underdog, I guess, but mostly it's just an ugly scrap at even odds.
Yeah, it's a hard fight to call. I feel like those odds are more or less on the money here. And as the more natural light heavyweight, Clark perhaps even deserves to be favored, but it should be close. It's a hard one to call with any degree of certainty.
Two guys who aren't durable, one of whom throws more volume and the other of whom has more power.
Yeah, and is a better wrestler as well. Two ways in which these guys can stop each other flat, but neither of whom are really consistent enough to guarantee that happening.
Yeah. That brings us to a bantamweight bout, Aljamain Sterling versus Augusto Mendes.
Well, it's a well-deserved step down for Aljamain Sterling, but maybe not as easy as it seems on first glance. Aljamain Sterling has been fighting like the best guys in the division, Brian Caraway and TJ Dillashaw. Not TJ Dillashaw, Brian Caraway and Rafael Assunção. Two tough matchups for him, especially Assunção. I thought was really difficult for Assunção for Sterling to get anything going, even if that fight looked relatively close. It's just a difficult guy for him to fight. But Augusto Mendes has some ways in which he can trouble Aljamain Sterling. Obviously, he is a phenomenal submission grappler. He's got, I think, 3 IBJJF gold medals in both gi and no gi. He's got like numerous Pan American and world titles in various grappling organizations. He is just a beast on the ground. He's kind of the bantamweight Jacare because he is a physical specimen with phenomenal grappling technique and a pretty solid wrestler as well. You know, so he's got if he has a few more years left in him still, he's got a pretty bright future in MMA, I think, with those basic aspects of his game. He's also shown some pretty good instincts for striking. He got flattened by Cody Garbrandt, but there's really no shame in that. In his fight with Frankie Saenz, I think both of us probably expected Frankie Saenz to do pretty well in that one. And even if you thought Frankie Saenz should have won because it was a close fight, Augusto Mendes hung in there with him every single step of the way. He landed a lot of power. He hurt Frankie Saenz about 3 times. He proved that he's got power and timing. And by the end of that fight, even though both guys were worn out because the pace was insane, Mendes was the one, you know, still timing his strikes and throwing the straighter punches and listening to his coaches too, going for takedowns in the middle of the cage, trying to steal the round, showing good instincts for a guy who's only had 6 fights under his belt at that point. So there's a lot to like about Augusto Mendes. And if we're talking about power punching in the pocket and phenomenal jiu-jitsu, those are 2 things you can easily see troubling Aljamain Sterling, who doesn't really like to box in mid-range. If the fight becomes closer than kicking range, he really becomes obviously uncomfortable and usually expects to dominate his opponents on the floor. And when he couldn't do that against Brian Caraway, I think it really wore him out mentally and physically. So there's a window here for Augusto Mendes. I think the main thing is that Mendes is still not quite technical enough as a striker to consistently get after somebody who just won't let him into the pocket. We haven't at least seen him do that yet. Frankie Saenz was constantly stepping into range, constantly engaging with him, giving him opportunities to hit his chin. Aljamain Sterling's going to stick a side kick in his gut for as long as he can and try to keep him at bay and shoot for the occasional takedown when Mendes invariably rushes forward to land a big strike. So unless Mendes once again surprises me and shows that he has really good cage cutting footwork and can move forward technically behind his punches, I think he will probably drop the first 2 rounds while very possibly doing some damage in the 3rd when Sterling starts to slow down. So I like Aljamain Sterling by a unanimous decision.
Yeah, I think the big thing that you mentioned there for me is how is the problem for in that Frankie Saenz fight for Saenz was really that he wanted to be in the pocket boxing with Mendes, and he was not as good there. He was not, you know, mostly it was that he wasn't as creative or as powerful. So that where he would, you know, Saenz would step in and land one shot that was reasonably hard and did a little damage, Mendes would come back with a 3-punch combination, 2 of which would hit Saenz right on the chin and leave him wobbled.
And frequently Saenz was like lunging out of his stance into the pocket where Mendes was just kind of staying rooted over his feet and countering him. So
yeah. So I think, you know, Saenz really gave Mendes the fight he wanted. And when they went to the mat, on the other hand, Mendes didn't exactly like light Saenz up. When he got positions, Saenz was able to get out of them.
Yeah, Saenz' counter wrestling was insane. But we know that, though. I mean, I'm not sure that Frankie Saenz may not be the best fighter in the division, but this is also a guy who pretty effortlessly out-wrestled Uriah Faber. You know, this is a guy who's a really top-notch scrambler. It's
true. What I want to make it clear here is that it may be also a sign that Augusto Mendes is not the next Damian Maia or Jacare in that way.
True.
You know? It's not the kind of thing where if he gets Aljamain Sterling down or if it hits the mat, Mendes is just gonna wrap him up and that's going to be it. Like,
yeah.
We haven't seen that from Mendes either at this stage.
No, especially considering my point is that he can compete better than most, because Aljamain Sterling, of course, is a crazy good submission grappler. Like, he dominates people who have been fighting much, much longer than him on the ground.
Yeah.
Just not Brian Caraway.
Yeah, except Brian Caraway. So and that is an interesting point, because Caraway is not that dissimilar to Mendes, except that he's a worse pocket boxer and a better range fighter, and a more true and tested tough veteran. That's the big thing for Caraway, is just him being an absurdly tough out. We don't know if Mendes is that or not yet. We don't know enough about that part of his game, but yeah, it could cause Sterling trouble if Sterling cannot work his wrestling game and his top game, and he cannot force Mendes to think about that. Then any stand-up fight with Aljamain Sterling where he cannot get a ground game going is going to be tough going for him, because it's going to be a points battle where his relatively ineffective range striking style has to see him through rounds.
I think Sterling, of all of those East Coast guys, would really be well served to start working with Mark Henry. Like, I think that style of flighty outside boxing would really, really benefit him as a guy who wants to maintain distance until he closes it to secure a takedown. But until that happens, I think the improvements in his boxing are to come very slowly. So, he showed some nice flashes against Sun Tzu. He had some nice jabs.
He looked good late when he actually realized that the secret to boxing is throwing punches.
Yeah. But that's the thing. He's just not confident in it yet.
Yeah. Once the fight got late and it was clear he was losing, and he was like, oh, maybe I should actually start sitting down on some offense and throw a couple punches, he did all right. But until then, he mostly just was really flighty and throwing a lot of ineffective offense at range.
Yeah. He's a phenomenal athlete. He just needs to realize that he can use athleticism for more than, like lateral movement and crazy flashy kicks that rarely do any damage.
Yeah. So I'm picking Sterling here. This loss would be a major step back for him. It would be the worst loss of his career, without question. But yeah, he needs to be able to go out there and if not grapple Mendes, wrestle him. Push him in the clinch, take him down. Even if you just get back up and then start the whole process over again, he needs to show that he's still a force technically at the top of the division as a wrestler. Because if it's just going to be get down to him banking on his striking, then I'm not going to feel confident in any Aljamain Sterling fight.
Unless he comes out here and really shows some nice punch combinations and actually nails Augusto Mendes with that jab. I think he's capable of doing it. I just don't think he knows he can do it.
We just haven't seen it yet. And I'm not going to bank on it without
definitely not. Only that slight glimmer in the third round of a fight with Rafael Sun Tzu. And it was still not nearly enough to secure the fight.
No. So Sterling is a favorite. -2, opening at -215, now at to -244. Mendes, the underdog, opening at +165, now at to +199. I wouldn't bet on Mendes. I don't know. I wouldn't bet at all, but it feels like Mendes is a little wider than he should be, but at the same time, like it would be a upset, and it would probably come via decision. Like it would probably be an incredibly close decision that Mendes just barely gets, and that's nothing that I would ever want to try and think about.
It's I don't know, like part of my gut says to place a small bet on Mendes because I know he is good enough to be competitive, and I think stylistically he offers some serious challenges to Aljamain Sterling. But also, because I think Aljamain Sterling has always been like, I think it really hurts him inside when he's nullified. I think that's the worst thing for him, is when he just feels ineffective. And with a guy who's got good wrestling and who can handle himself really well on the ground and who can swing back hard enough to keep Sterling from stepping in with strikes, he may nullify Sterling. But again, if we're talking about a really inexperienced guy with a pretty crude game, who I'm not sure really has the strategic thinking as a kickboxer to take the fight to Sterling the way he would need to beat him.
Yeah, like the thing is if Sterling wasn't a good enough submission wrestler and a wrestler in general that he has never been submitted to date, then I might suggest that, like, oh yeah, well, Mendes has a shot to finish this fight. But until I've seen, without me feeling like he's gonna get a finish, and without me feeling like he's gonna sub Sterling or club and sub him,
Sterling's got a great chin too. I mean,
Sterling's got a good chin. So that at that point, then you're really just banking on can Mendes eke out 3 rounds on a pocket boxing game or with position if he can constantly get positions, and that just doesn't feel likely.
Not likely enough to bet it anyway.
No. That brings us to a flyweight bout. First fight on are all the prelims on Fox as well?
Yeah, they are. Yeah.
Weird.
Okay,
first fight on Fox. Tim Elliott versus Louis Smolka. And
this is you, I believe.
Yeah, this feels like exactly the wrong kind of fight for Louis Smolka from what I've seen of him in his career.
Yeah, no kidding.
Smolka is, if he has a physical advantage or a technical grappling advantage, Smolka is a really solid, tricky fighter to beat with either of those two things. You put him in against Paddy Holohan, who's just not a good athlete at all, or Neil Seary, who's not a great wrestler,
or Ben Nguyen, who is dangerous but not a great athlete.
Well, Ben Nguyen's really just he's not a bad athlete. He's just not a good grappler. He makes really poor decisions continuously with his wrestling and grappling defense.
Yeah, on the ground, he doesn't look particularly athletic. He's not a great scrambler, and it takes like a Ray Borg, to out scramble Louis Smolka.
Yeah. So when he faces those kinds of fighters, Smolka can go out there and just be really shockingly effective.
Yeah, he just flows, man. Again, when he gets the opportunity, he's smooth as butter on the ground.
But you put him in there against another guy who can push a pace on the mat and really just go after him in scrambles, and Smolka wilts pretty definitively. He cannot keep that kind of pace. He himself is not the best athlete in the world. And Tim Elliott, I don't know that Tim Elliott can set the pace he sets, but even when he gets tired, he will go after you for every second of every minute of every fight. And I think Smolka is going to give him a lot to go after. Elliott's the much smoother striker at this stage in his career. Weirdly, that came out of nowhere for me. Tim Elliott's smooth striking. And then on the ground, he's just tough as shit and will go after you in any position he can. And I think that spells bad news for Louis Smolka.
Yeah, the fact that Tim Elliott, who I believe talked about going to bantamweight after that fight with Demetrious Johnson, but I guess he's decided that the hard weight cut is still worth it. He's a big, strong flyweight. Louis Smolka is going to be longer and taller than him, but Tim Elliott is a fairly long and tall dude with a thick frame.
Smolka's a beanpole. He's really thin.
Very, very waifish. He's very lanky. Not in a good way necessarily. Tim Elliott's problem with that weight cut, and I assume it has something to do with the weight cut, is that he can gas himself because he likes to push a crazy pace. But when he wins, it is often because the pressure he puts on his opponent tires them out more than him. You know, so long as he is a little fresher than his opponent, that was the problem against Demetrious Johnson more than anything, is that you're not going to outpace Demetrious Johnson. So as soon as you start to get tired and he's still fresh, things go downhill. We've seen Louis Smolka gas. You know what I mean? We've seen Louis Smolka get worn out by fast pace in fights. His fight with, was it Vic Grujic? Richie Vasulik, sorry. Ugly ass fight. Like, and Louis Smolka was like dead tired when he landed the
Smolka did come in on very short notice with very little.
That's true.
For that.
That's a fair point. That's a fair point. When he gets the kind of exchanges on the ground that he wants, though, he looks pretty good when he's in control. But I think Tim Elliott's going to make him tire out pretty quickly just by pushing the pace. Tim Elliott's a very effective takedown artist. He's a really solid scrambler. He's probably on par with Louis Smolka there. And he is a better striker, not just because he puts on pressure, but he's got some nice timing and I think some surprising power in his hands as well. And, you know, I could see Louis Smolka is technically good enough to do to Tim Elliott something like what Joe Benavidez did, like just catch his neck on a takedown, because Elliott is really, really not concerned with defense as much as he maybe should be. But that's going to take Louis Smolka, like, usually it takes him getting the chance to scramble and flow a little bit before he finds those openings. And in the meantime, he puts himself into a lot of bad positions because he is such a willing scrambler. So I think the athleticism, the size, the strength, and the pace of Tim Elliott are going to give him a decision win here.
Yeah, I would be surprised if Smolka could do what Joseph Benavidez did, and you know,
tough turnaround for him, right? Guy on a 4-fight win streak, it'll probably turn into a 3-fight losing streak immediately after.
Yeah, he's hitting a tough run of super scrappy scrambling flyweights, and it's putting a very firm cap on his rise in that division.
Flyweight's just a murderer's row, dude. Like,
it is.
Everyone in the top 20 is really good. And there are only like top 20 guys in the UFC that just, you can't get a step down to get yourself back on track. Or like, what is a gatekeeper at flyweight? Who is even a gatekeeper?
Ryan Benoit is probably the closest thing you have.
Yeah. And he's like sub top 10.
Yeah.
Right. So like, who's the gatekeeper to the elite? There's no one, because like the whole top 10 are all guys who can beat each other, except none of them can beat Demetrious Johnson.
The only other thing would be Ben Wen, because he's such a good athlete, but his game is so cobbled together.
Yeah, but again, like these guys aren't even like who's our like Ryan Bader? You know
I mean? Yeah.
Who's like our top 5, top 6, our perennial top 5 dude who can't win?
Chris Carriasso, but he's gone now.
Because he kept fighting killers. Like, there's just no option. Even the gatekeepers can't catch a goddamn break.
No.
They're constantly holding the gates against these terrifying hordes of elite fighters. So it's tough, man. It's tough for a guy.
There's Connor. All right, I'm going to give the odds before Connor gets back. Tim Elliott is the favorite, opening at -230 and dropping pretty quickly down into the -300 range. He's actually closed a little since then to -261. And Smolka opening at +170, jumping up into the +230 range, and now very slowly fading or closing back towards +212. So I'm not exactly sure why those odds are closing lately at all, but I don't know. Otherwise, they look fine.
People must just see Smolka as a finisher and Elliott as a little wild, but you know.
Yeah, I mean, Tim Elliott, his last loss was his last getting finished loss was Joseph Benavidez. And before that, it was a 2009 TKO to somebody named Jackie Bryant.
Yeah.
But
yeah, I'm not saying it's a wise line of thinking. I just think that's probably what it is. That Smolka is a dangerous, like, opportunistic grappler. But smooth recovery, by the way, Zane. It's not a vivisection without my feed cutting out at least once, right?
It's true. I just figured I'd use the opportunity of you not talking to actually.
You son of a bitch.
All right. That brings us to a lightweight bout: Bobby Green versus Rashid Magomedov. Let's see.
Me, right?
Yeah, this is you.
Lovely. The door alarm. Everything goes right during the vivisection, right? I like this fight. I don't have any idea what to expect out of Bobby Green. I am very happy to see Rashid Magomedov making a quick turnaround. He had a tough out against Beneil Dariush, who fought, I think, the perfect game plan to nullify and beat him. Bobby Green, how long has it been since Bobby's fought?
He actually fought Dustin Poirier last year, but that was off of a 2-year layoff before that when he fought Edson Barboza in 2014.
Yeah, and it's been 10 months since then.
Yeah.
So, once again, a fairly decent layoff. The guy's been having injuries and, 2
Family
losses. Has he? Oh, yeah. So all kinds of shit going on in Bobby Green's life. And a guy who was always like a very solid journeyman has now sort of hit his ceiling, I think, in fighting 2 of the division's best. And while Rashid Magomedov has not really earned the accolades of guys like Dustin Poirier and Edson Barboza, I think he is a good enough fighter to be up there near those ranks. If he were to fight some more guys in the bottom of the top 15, he could assert himself as one of those fighters. He's an extremely technical fighter. He has a problem with output and dealing with pressure. We saw that against Beneil Dariush, that Magomedov is maybe just not enough of like a fighter to
I think that there's a real feeling that Dariush loss, it's sort of like when Strickland against Usman, maybe, where it's like it actually shows where the rubber hits the road on his style.
Yeah.
Or it's like you faced somebody that technically you're supposed to have a style good enough to beat. Somebody who's going to pressure you and you counter, but you aren't countering enough to actually deal with that pressure, and that it creates questions about Magomedov as a real top 10, top 15 fighter, but it doesn't create questions about him otherwise as a very good fighter.
Yeah, and I still think he's good enough that he could beat a guy like Beneil Dariush. He's just there's a mental block there that prevents him from doing so, and hopefully he will take that fight as a learning opportunity. It was the first guy to beat him since 2010. When he fought Frodo Kazbulaev, and he's been basically he's experienced no punishments for fighting as like this slow-paced tactical fighter. He's gotten comfortable wins, and even the fights that have been relatively close, he's landed a big shot to really put a stamp on it. His accuracy, his surprising power, those have always been enough to negate the fact that he is a pretty inactive fighter, but I think he can be more active. I think he can move a little more and actually enforce his distance a little more rather than just drawing the opponent in. It's possible. Whether he will be able to do it at 32 after having used this style for so long is its own question. But what we really should focus on here is Bobby Green, because Bobby Green has a blueprint now to beat Magomedov, right? He's a good enough clinch fighter, and he can be mean enough that he could do a lot of what Beneil Dariush did. He could close that distance, but the last time he fought someone that was the way to beat them was Edson Barboza, and he spent a lot of time doing absolutely nothing, just taunting, like just teasing Barboza for kicking him in the liver. You know what I mean? Like he would just eat a devastating shot to the body and then be like, "Oh yeah, why don't you do it again?" And then Barboza would, and then Bobby Green would be like, "You idiot!" Like he just completely gave the fight away, and he's done a lot of that throughout his career. He basically, I think, had some of the best form of his career, but also a long streak of luck to account for a lot of the wins that he had before that long win streak. Like the groin shots against James Krause, that's some true weirdness. The close decision with Josh Thompson that I think a lot of people thought he actually didn't win, that's bizarre. And then just these 2 bed-shitting performances against Edson Barboza and Dustin Poirier. It makes you doubt whether Bobby Green can fight to a game plan for 3 rounds, even when the game plan is there in front of him. And even then, Bobby Green is not quite the pressure fighter that Beneil Dariush is. It's something he can do. He has done in bursts, but for consistency, it'd be surprising if Bobby Green just put the pressure on Magomedov for like 10 minutes straight. So most likely, I think he's going to try and do his flashy striking thing at long range and occasionally shoot for takedowns. We know Magomedov is extremely difficult to take down, despite the fact that Dariush had him in the clinch for the entirety of their fight. He didn't get him down once. And at range, there are a few strikers who are as precise and as accurate as Rashid Magomedov. So I think we're probably looking at a Magomedov decision here. Bobby Green could surprise us. He's always a guy who's capable of surprising, but it has become harder and harder to trust him in recent years.
Yeah, I get the feeling this is going to be one of those fights where we are watching two guys at range refusing to sit down on anything and waiting for that, waiting continually for what is going to be a slow simmer to turn into a boil, and it never will. The big thing for me here with Bobby Green is that, as we saw in the Dustin Poirier fight and in the Edson Barboza fight, he really has gotten into this wanting to bait people to come after him, wanting to taunt them. And while he's doing that, he's not necessarily putting together a way to win the round around that taunting. It's really just, if you play his game, he has a way to beat you with that. But if you don't play his game, and we know Rashid Magomedov is not going to play Bobby Green's game because he's pretty much you cannot bait Rashid Magomedov into fighting harder, as we have seen. Then Green is going to be left trying to figure out exactly how to create offense. I mean, the thing that Magomedov does is, while he is almost entirely a counter fighter and highly counter-focused fighter, he also puts out just enough offense to make sure he's winning rounds in the meantime. Like, he'll just throw a lot of jabs and little leg kicks that are there to give his opponent the necessary frustration that they have to come after him with something big. And I have a feeling that that's going to make Bobby Green fall into Magomedov's trap a lot more than Magomedov falls into Green's.
Yeah, so the thing about Bobby Green, I do want to emphasize, like, he's a good fighter, or at least in his time, he was one of the best dudes in the world. He was up there in a stacked division, and really he was always a great spoiler. Like, he would make more experienced, arguably more elite fighters look worse than they were, even when they beat him. So the thing that worries me is that when he fought two fighters who were better than him in his last two fights, he didn't spoil. Like, he didn't make them look bad by any stretch of the imagination. So if he can't do that anymore, how's he going to beat Rashid Magomedov?
Yeah. Yeah. And we've seen that Dariush too, that, especially in the Barboza fight afterward, Dariush is really a great pressure fighter.
Yeah.
His chin may not be there to be an elite pressure fighter, but he has the technical ability to be a great pressure fighter.
Yeah, he was well on his way to beating Edson Barboza before that flying knee. I mean, Barboza was hanging in there and adapting, but Dariush had the initiative against probably the best striker in the entire division. So
yeah, so it is really, Magomedov not being able to handle that. It just says that, Magomedov doesn't have what Edson Barboza has. He doesn't have that ability to change a fight with a single strike, or to follow up on changing a fight with a single strike. He doesn't have the ability to pull something quite that big out, but I would be surprised if Bobby Green had the ability to pressure him anywhere nearly as effectively.
There's no real shame in that. What it is just like, it's a hard stylistic limitation, but it's not like it means that Magomedov is done as a fighter. It's just, if he fights somebody who can swarm him and prevent him his range, it'll give him problems.
Yep. And that has Magomedov coming in as a decided favorite, opening at -260, dropping right down to -330, and now out to -351. and Green opening at plus 180 and now out to plus 280. The only thing that has me not challenging how wide those odds are is how little idea I have about where Bobby Green is right now.
Yeah, but that also kind of makes you think, like, should they be that? What if Bobby Green comes back and he's Bobby Green? He's not that old yet.
Yeah.
So who knows? It's a weird fight, man. It's not the hardest fight on the card to call. I think that's probably Waterson, Namajunas for me. But it's one of the hardest fights to really have a picture of what's going to happen, namely because of Bobby Green.
Yeah. All right, that brings us to bantamweight bout Patrick Williams versus Tom Duquesnoy. And this is me. So I do like this fight a lot. I think, beyond my love of Tom Duquesnoy, which I love him and am excited to see him coming to the UFC and make an impact in the division. But I also like that kind of the first fighter he's getting is exactly the kind of fighter that he wasn't facing a lot of regionally in Europe, which is the sort of overpowering American wrestler. I mean, honestly, it may be the last time Duquesnoy really faced that was Makwan Amirkhani, who submitted him. But so, it's interesting. It'll be interesting to me to see that dynamic. I think it's a good introduction for fans of Duquesnoy, an introduction of him. In that, too, it'll also be that immediate idea that, like, you're not going the Conor McGregor route where it's like, oh, we don't want him to face the wrestlers. Like, he's immediately going to face somebody who wrestles quite well. And also, to Williams' credit, creates a lot of creative, powerful offense that people don't expect. He will come forward with crazy strikes from weird angles, thrown with a fair bit of power to them, because he's a very good athlete. The only problem is that for as good an offensive wrestler as he is, and for as interesting a striker as he can be offensively, he is absolutely awful defensively. Especially standing, he is one of the worst fighters in the UFC as a defensive fighter. And
on the receiving end of one of the most devastating flying knees ever.
Yeah, like usually a flying knee knockout like what Chris Beal hit Patrick Williams with is this sort of like, you got caught. Like,
yeah, or like you get baited into it, like you duck into it, or they time a takedown. It's not usually you like circling along the fence with room to move and you just get nailed on the chin while standing straight up.
Yeah, Patrick Williams on the wrong end of that flying knee KO is an absolute indictment of his striking defense, mostly because while he's still in the pocket, when strikes start coming at him, his response is to put his hands down, turn his back, and run out of the pocket. And that is how he has defended himself in fights is, oh, there's something incoming. Well, I better put my hands down and run out of here as quickly as I can and start to turn away. And it gives ample opportunity for him to get just lit up entirely. So as long as Duquesnoy doesn't get caught in anything crazy early on, and Duquesnoy is a very, very effective defensive fighter, very mindful of his defense, not a bad wrestler at all, good grappler, all these things. As long as he doesn't get caught in something crazy, Williams is going to give him a lot of opportunities to land his own offense. And Duquesnoy's offense is creative and multi-layered and there to finish fights. So I expect Duquesnoy to get a fun highlight reel knockout while also facing his first American wrestler test.
Yeah, Duquesnoy has maybe not on the European scene and Bama mostly faced like really good American wrestlers, but it is important to remember that he used to be a featherweight and he was shockingly effective despite being even pretty small for the bantamweight limit. Like, I bet you Duquesnoy could probably make flyweight with a moderately difficult cut.
Yeah, he's Tim Elliott sized.
Yeah, he's not a big dude. He's 5'7". He hits like a fucking welterweight at this weight class, but he he's not huge. And even at bantamweight, people are often taller and longer than him. The guys at featherweight.
At Bama 25, real quick, he weighed in at 133.2.
Right. Like, I think we might see Duquesnoy at flyweight at some point in the UFC, or maybe at least moving down for the occasional fight. But he is like he has a huge amount of potential to be a very, very effective fighter. He could be like a MMA's Henry Armstrong, just kind of jumping around 3 weight classes and being effective at all of them. I could definitely see that. The thing with Duquesnoy is that while he hasn't faced a lot of American wrestlers, he did face a lot of huge featherweights. Mm-hmm. Like Krzysztof Klaszczak was a very muscular, like quite possibly steroid-riddled grappler who went after Duquesnoy with some really nice takedowns very often early in that fight. And he got him down early, but couldn't get anything going. And anytime he tried to get anything going, Duquesnoy would immediately scramble back to his feet. And by the time Duquesnoy started to do a little damage, he was stuffing takedowns with ease. Brendan Loughnane was like a full 6 inches taller than Tom Duquesnoy and looked easily
going on Nate Diaz.
Looked easily 300 pounds heavier. He was big compared to Duquesnoy, right?
He's
like
5'9" to Duquesnoy's 5'7", but
yeah, it did. To make the comparison, it did look like when Diaz and McGregor first fought at UFC 196, where like I watched that fight and I was like, wow, like Nate Diaz is visibly larger than Conor McGregor.
Yeah.
And that's how it was for basically all of Tom Duquesnoy's featherweight fights. Like even when he fought a pretty unremarkable fighter, a guy named James Zachary looked like a giant next to him. It looked like Fedor fighting bigger heavyweights. And the fact that he was successful in stopping their takedowns, and especially that he was successful in just blasting them with power punches, I think says a lot about the quality of him as a fighter. I don't think that Patrick Williams will have a lot of success with his wrestling. I think he may get a takedown, but Duquesnoy is much like Thomas Almeida in that even if you can take him down, like, can you stop him from securing a whizzer and instantly switching his hips and jumping back to his feet? Probably not. The guy has he hits the ground like it's a trampoline and comes right back to his feet more often than not. And if he is forced to grapple, he's a good grappler. Good with his defense, great with his scrambles. He's got a really nice back take game. Solid ground and pound. He likes to hit the body on the ground, which I don't see nearly enough guys doing, but he will just smash you in the solar plexus with a right hand while you're lying on your back. And of course, just being an offensive dynamo. You mentioned his defense, and I think it does deserve to be mentioned, but Duquesnoy will like make you miss or block a strike and then just smash you in the leg with a thudding kick. I described him on Heavy Hands as looking a lot like Justin Gaethje with defense. And that's maybe a little too simplistic to describe him accurately, but you kind of get the idea. We have a guy who hits really hard and who is not nearly as easy as it seems like he should be to hit back.
I think maybe like Chad Mendes with
sure.
a lot of the high guard stuff where he'll be like, it looks like stuff is coming at him and hitting him, but if you actually watch most of what is coming after him, he's catching on his forearms.
Yeah, that Loughnane fight was a prime example of that happening, where the commentators were like so excited that Loughnane was landing the occasional jab. Meanwhile, Duquesnoy was like blocking and deflecting about 2/3 of every strike that came his way.
Yeah.
He's solid, man. He's very well rounded. I don't want to speak too highly of him because I think, being, a guy who's so aggressive and so determined to fight in the pocket, he could run into that wall that Tomas Almeida has run into. Mm-hmm. I think he already looks a little more durable than Tomas Almeida and probably a little better defensively from the outset of each fight. But good counterpunchers, people with really good footwork, they are going to give him trouble at some point. For the time being, though, he's not fighting those guys. He's fighting Patrick Williams. And I think he's going to dust Patrick Williams without too much trouble.
Odds makers see it the same. Duquesnoy opened at -385, now at -484. Williams opened at +265, now to +374. So those odds are already getting wide to the point that if you wanted to bet on Tom Duquesnoy, you've probably missed the boat.
Yeah, there's no bet there. Under 1.5 rounds is -150. That is not bad for a hittable Patrick Williams against a Tom Duquesnoy who has specialized in knocking people out in the first 2 rounds. That's not a bad bet.
That may still be a smart pick, although yeah, maybe, I don't know.
I think if you're gonna bet on a fight that most consider to be a foregone conclusion, that's probably the way to do it.
Probably. That brings us to a, let's see, got myself lost here somehow. Brings us to a heavyweight bout: Alexander Volkov versus Roy Nelson.
Classic in the making, Zane. Yeah, Roy Nelson, like, what can you say, dude? He just won't go away. Either in the fights themselves or in his career. The guy is probably, and I say this honestly with a heavy heart, is probably going to have some serious issues later in his life, because resilience is the key word with Roy Nelson. This is a guy who, yeah, he's been knocked out by Mark Hunt and Andrei Arlovsky. You know, what a shame that two of the hardest hitters ever put him out.
6 years apart.
Right. But Derek Lewis couldn't knock him out. And, you know, Junior Dos Santos couldn't knock him out. Like,
or
he's fought
Reem or Stipe Miocic.
Right. He's fought the most dangerous dudes for a long, long time. And he has just absorbed the number of strikes he took from Junior Dos Santos was disgusting. I mean, like, truly inhuman durability. And that is still a weapon for him. Like, I don't think he's really shown much degradation in his chin. It's still a thing that he can rely on against most fighters. And the complement to that has always been the shocking speed of Roy Nelson. Very similar to Mark Hunt in that regard, with a little less technique. But the quickness with which Nelson can get his feet into position and unload that right hand has always surprised people. And there was a lot less of that in the fight with Bigfoot Silva. I think we saw very clear signs that Roy Nelson is no longer capable of surging forward and shocking you with the right hand the way he once was, because we have a fairly hittable guy in Bigfoot Silva, and it took Roy Nelson quite a long time to land the right hand. But we did also see the benefit of Roy Nelson's experience. This is a guy who didn't realize that throwing an uppercut was an option until he fought Matt Mitrione, but he threw a lot of good ones once he got the read on Bigfoot Silva that the overhand right was not working. So that's the strike he knocked him out with. He hurt him about 3 times in the second round. And just Roy Nelson getting a second round finish at all is a good sign. Even against Bigfoot Silva, Roy has always really struggled to go past the first round and still be effective. But we have seen that I think his stamina is improving in recent fights. Even as he slows down a bit, the 5-round fight with Josh Barnett, very competitive. Yeah. You know, he stayed in there the entire time. Decision over Jared Rosholt, a case to win the decision over Derek Lewis, and then a second-round finish against Antonio Silva. I think all of those are signs that Roy Nelson is capable of fighting for longer periods of time than he once was. I am favoring Alexander Volkov here because we've got a much younger, much quicker fighter. Volkov, for a guy with his long, lanky frame, a lot of those fighters tend to look pretty ponderous, but Volkov is light on his feet. He moves pretty quickly with his strikes. The problem is, of course, that he is a tall guy who doesn't move his head. So basically, he is the Roy Nelson knockout waiting to happen. And Volkov, he's very durable, but he's definitely there to be hit. So I think he is going to have to really control distance and just play a very patient game against Roy Nelson, especially early in the fight when Roy is most dangerous. I like him to win a decision, but I think he's going to survive at least one scare because Roy Nelson's still pretty accurate, still got good timing with that right hand, can still knock out any man on the earth. And Alexander Volkov, hard to knock out, but not hard to hit. So I take Volkov by decision here, but I really think that Roy Nelson may get another big win.
Yeah, I would have more of that same faith you do, because Volkov, especially, I don't know that Volkov pays much attention to working around his opponent's offense. Like, I think especially Volkov kind of tends to walk in on people and try and initiate the clinch. And I don't think that's a good idea versus Roy Nelson. But the problem I have with this, and the problem that is the thing giving me pause about Roy Nelson, is that I don't think Roy Nelson has the same knockout ability that he used to have with his speed going. Maybe he can fight better longer than he used to, as we saw, with the 5-round Josh Barnett fight. Maybe he's getting better at staying active later in fights. But I think it's also that he is not able to do the kind of damage that he used to do. And he's being more of a punch bag for longer. I mean, the fact that it did take him 2 rounds to knock out Antonio Silva, to me, is just, it's more of an alarm bell than anything, that he just doesn't have much the same power that he used to, because he's not throwing with the same unexpected speed. And without the unexpected speed, people see his power shots coming, so they can brace for it.
Which really hurts when you still are mostly just one punch.
Yeah. And because of all that, even though I think Volkov is just going to walk right into a couple of right hands, I think that he'll survive them, and I think he'll take the decision. And I don't have as much faith in Roy Nelson knockout puncher. That's the big thing. His only 2 knockouts since 2013 are, Rodrigo Nogueira and Antonio Silva, and neither of those dudes says anything about still being able to catch people.
Yeah.
So, I'm taking Volkov by decision, but it'll be interesting, especially because Volkov is also a terrible takedown defender who relies on clinch offense. So
we've seen a lot more takedowns from Roy Nelson lately.
Yeah, if Roy Nelson wants to wrestle his way to victory, Volkov might give him a lot of chances to do it. I don't have much faith in Roy Nelson beating a young heavyweight in the more or less prime of his career that's not named Jared Rosholt.
Yeah.
And even then, I'm not even sure that Roy Nelson won that Jared Rosholt fight.
Yeah, that's true. He won't go away, but he's certainly not making other people go away the way he used to.
No. So on that note, Volkov is the favorite, opening at -140. A lot of movement up and down on this line. Currently at -148. And Roy Nelson opening at +100, now out to +124. So I don't know. Don't bet on heavyweight.
Is there a prop on Nelson by KO? I'm not saying it's worthwhile.
Only over-unders.
What's the odds for this card?
Yeah.
Very limited odds, right?
Very. Surprisingly so.
Strange. Yeah. I mean, if you do have a bookie who offers that at really good underdog odds, that's maybe the bet to make. You got Roy Nelson. You got a hittable guy. But again, the only guy who's ever knocked Volkov out is still undefeated. I'm forgetting his first name. Vitaly Minakov.
Yeah.
Who's still undefeated and is quite a prolific finisher. And he also had to smash Volkov on the ground with a bunch of strikes after dropping him, and Volkov still wasn't unconscious. So it's not like we're talking about a guy who can't take a punch here.
No, I mean, we saw what Timothy Johnson floored Volkov with, and Volkov bounced right back up from that.
Yeah, definitely. So unless Roy can really follow up or really, really hurt him, and again, I think he's also less capable of doing that than he used to be because of the missing speed, then it should be Volkov's fight.
That brings us to that's the end of the prelims. So that brings us to the main card now. And the first bout on the main card, Jeremy Stephens versus Renato Moicano. And I don't get this fight, honestly, because I like Renato Moicano as a prospect. I think he's got fast hands. He's fun in the pocket as a boxer. He's an exciting, scrambling grappler. I do not see him at all being ready for Jeremy Stephens, where Jeremy Stephens is at this point in his career.
Yeah.
The biggest thing is Moicano's hesitancy at range and willingness to, like, the core of how he wants to strike is he wants to wait at range until you run in on him, and then he counters with a big flurry of fast hooks and punches in the pocket.
Wide hooks, too.
Yeah. And he's got the fast hands to try and make that work. But the thing is Jeremy Stephens' career has gone on. He's become a much, much better range striker at managing what he throws from distance. Like, he can still off-balance himself every now and then leading, but mostly, like, he throws with enough power, and Moicano is very static out there and does not respond well to pressure. That's the other big thing. Zubaira Tukhugov ran in on Moicano a couple of times in their fight, and Moicano just fell over because he got himself tangled up. Basically, with his defensive footwork, he couldn't back up fast enough and fell on his ass. So Moicano doesn't handle pressure well, and Stephens is not he's one of those fighters who he wants, at his best, Stephens wants to pressure you. He wants to pressure for counters where he's stalking forward, making you react, and then throwing a big counter shot to react to your reaction. But if you just give him time and space to be creative, he can still absolutely blow your doors off with a hard shot or two leading from range. And I think that Moicano is going to give him too many opportunities sitting outside and just watching and waiting to see what Stephens does. Stephens has been able to be caught off guard when he doesn't expect things. He can get tracked in on the fight as he sees it and as he expects it, and has trouble adjusting. He also has trouble sometimes responding to getting hit hard. He kind of freezes up for a second. But I don't think that the big thing there would be that if Moicano's wrestling could really take Stephens out of his element and be a shock, like Charles Oliveira's was for Stephens. Charles Oliveira had no trouble getting Stephens down. But Charles Oliveira is a much sneakier, better wrestler than Moicano.
Apparently a much better wrestler than either of us gave him credit for, too, because he has been taking down easily a lot of pretty good defensive wrestlers, including Will Brooks. He got Anthony Pettis down at featherweight way easier than Eddie Alvarez could at lightweight. Yep. And, taking down Jeremy Stephens with ease is, I still think, impressive. Like, Jeremy Stephens has not ever been an amazing offensive wrestler, but he's always been a pretty stout guy, and I think even more so at featherweight. So
and like I say, if Stephens expects that offense, like even Frankie Edgar had no luck getting Stephens to the mat.
No,
none. And Darren Elkins didn't have any luck either. Like if Stephens sees that takedown threat as present, he's very good at stuffing it.
Definitely.
So if Moicano can somehow pull that ace up his sleeve out, that would be a game changer for him. But he's not. Most of his game is really like waiting for his opponent to come to him and then reacting to what they do and what they bring. And I think waiting on Jeremy Stephens is really just waiting to get blasted really hard. So I got to pick Stephens here, and I think they're kind of doing Moicano a disservice throwing him like. Nothing about a split decision over Zubaira Tukhugov says you should fight Jeremy Stephens next.
No. I mean, I thought that should have been a pretty clear decision, but even so, like, not a fight that he ran away with.
No.
And Jeremy Stephens, perhaps counterintuitive. This is still, I think, Jeremy Stephens' true prime.
Yeah.
If we compare that to where his athletic prime should be, Stephens is one of those fighters who continues to learn and improve even after maybe he has enough wear and tear that he should be slowing down physically. He doesn't seem to be slowing down physically very much, and he has definitely made marked improvements to his technique and strategic thinking since moving down to featherweight.
The guys that have beat him lately, other than Oliveira, Max Holloway, Frankie Edgar, were able to dip in and out of range and pot shot him, and Cub Swanson wasn't beating him until Stephens broke his hand.
Yeah, at featherweight, it's Cub Swanson, Max Holloway, and Frankie Edgar. And then Charles Oliveira, who, while spotty, is one of the most dangerous dudes in the world when he has his game going. So, there's no shame whatsoever in any aspect of Stephens' featherweight career. He's looked really good. And he's been fighting really good competition too. Like Jeremy Stephens is an established fighter, so it's not like he's gotten any tune-ups. His easiest fight in the last 4 years was the one with Esteban Payan, and since then he's been fighting like Hani Jason, Darren Elkins, Dennis Bermudez, Renan Barao. Those are the guys he's beating. Speaking of Renan Barao and waiting on Jeremy Stephens to lead, I think this is basically Stephens Barao light with a much less experienced Brazilian taking the place of Renan Barao. And while Moicano has a lot of the stuff that makes Barao good, you know, he's got a surprising jab. He's got a really nice kicking game, really nice low kicks. And of course, solid defensive wrestling and scrambling and a very dangerous back take. All of those things are, you know, to his credit. He still possesses, as you noted, the worst habit of Barao's, which is to just let people come after him. And that was when Barao got into trouble. When he was moving around and making Jeremy Stephens chase and stabbing him with quick shots, he was doing really well. And the moment he started to slow down and stand in front of Jeremy Stephens, he just got lit up. He adapted well, but he adapted well because he's Renan Barao. Right, I don't have confidence that somebody like Renato Moicano, who's only been fighting for a few years and only has like 11 fights under his belt, can do that same, can achieve that same level of adaptation. So it's not like he's completely without hope here. He could, especially if it goes to the ground, he's good enough to find something on Jeremy Stephens, who's not the most unsubmittable guy in the world, but like, doing so would require him to take down a guy who, as we both noted, has always been a very good defensive wrestler, and especially so at featherweight, where he is a big, strong fighter.
It should also be noted on the Stephens submittable line, like, I realize that's the thing people think about with him. Literally the last time Jeremy Stephens got submitted was an armbar to Joe Lozon in 2009.
Yeah, that is true. Yeah, that's fair.
3 times, Din Thomas, Joe Lozon, and Chris Mickle in 2005.
Yeah, so I was unfair to Jeremy Stephens there.
And they're almost all, you know, the 2 Din Thomas and Joe Lozon ones are arm bars, and they're probably likely with Stephens in top control getting wild.
Yeah, probably. And something he doesn't really do anymore now that he's tightened up his game. And so, yeah, Stephens is solid, man. He's just a solid fighter. And
Charles Oliveira couldn't sub him, and that's a pretty good mark of Stephens' own sub-defense these days.
True, yeah. While Stephens may be competitive rather than dominant with every one of the top fighters in this division, you can definitely say he's been very competitive in every one of his last 4 fights. And when you say that against Dennis Bermudez, Max Holloway, Renan Barao, and Frankie Edgar, you know, when you are like stunning or knocking out all of these guys, or at least making them work hard to beat you, that's a feather in your cap. And so I think Jeremy Stephens is a pretty easy pick here.
Yeah, it feels that way to me, and I'm surprised that they made this fight. It feels kind of unfair to Moicano, who's a pretty good prospect.
I agree, yeah, because I like Moicano a lot. I think he has a ton of potential.
Stephens is the favorite, -165, dropping down to -222, and now rising back up to -190. And Moicano, the underdog, opening at +125 up to +180, and now dropping back down to +163. So I'm both surprised that the odds have been this tight on this fight, and I'm surprised that they are tightening again. Like that they were getting wider is no surprise to me, but that they are now tightening up again, I feel like Stephens is a pretty easy pick.
Yeah, I think so too. I think Stephens may actually be worth a bet if you can get him under -200.
Yeah, I don't know. It seems interesting to me to see the line move like that, and to see Stephens being like, Stephens is less of a favorite than like Tim Elliott over Louis Smolka, and
he's less of a favorite than Jacare over Whittaker, which I think is a really close fight. Like,
yeah. I'm pretty surprised that it's as close as it is, and he's less of a favorite than Zak Cummings over Nathan Coy, and he's been a better fighter than Zak Cummings, and Moicano is.
People disrespect Jeremy Stephens, man. He's solid. He's just put together well. So yeah, I think Moicano may have some moments, but I'd be really surprised if he could win 2 rounds.
Yeah.
And
he's even less of a favorite than Aljo over Augusto Mendes.
Yeah, that's kind of weird. That is a little weird. I don't know, especially if the line's close. Like if you can find Jeremy Stephens under -200 or even under -190, I think the closer he gets to even odds, the better a bet he is, even as a favorite, because he deserves to be a pretty sizable favorite.
Yeah, so that's interesting to me to see. It's certainly a surprise. Beyond that, let's see. That brings us to a middleweight bout now. Jacare Souza versus Robert Whittaker.
Is this me?
Let's see.
Neither of us can keep track anymore. This, I think, while not an unwinnable fight for Jacare, of course, is a really rough draw of the deck for him. Like, he's been dealt a rough hand because this is a guy who should be in the title picture, who were things a little bit different with the judges, and his fight with Yoel Romero could very well be the guy waiting for that shot at Michael Bisping right now. That was certainly a fight that he had a strong case for winning, really, really close. And now he has to fight someone who I think is actually uniquely difficult for him. Jacare is he's on the Damian Maia level of jiu-jitsu players in MMA. He is one of the most dominant forces on the ground. And he has the wrestling, much like Maia, though different style of wrestling. He has the wrestling to back that up. He's a very strong and explosive guy. He's slowing down a bit with age, but you give him a kick or something to time, and he will shoot for a takedown. Robert Whittaker has some of the best takedown defense in the UFC. He has not faced someone like Jacare, neither someone so large and strong nor someone so skilled, but he's also really not come close to being taken down at middleweight. And one of the reasons for that is not only is he just a naturally good clinch fighter, like he knows how to dig for hooks, he knows how to take angles and get head position, he responds really well to shots, but also he tends to move enough that opponents have a hard time lining up their takedown attempts. And I think that could be kind of poison for Jacare, who is a pretty slow guy on his feet. You know, he can explode really well with strikes and with takedowns, but when he is stalking his opponents, he's very deliberate, shall we say. Like, not a guy who covers distance quickly, or who cuts tight angles, or who bounces around and just cuts off every chance to get back to center of the cage. And I think that'll be even bigger problem for him in the large octagon. You know, he's got all this space. I think the best performance he's had cutting down a striker with his footwork was against Gegard Mousasi. We talked about that last week, but again, that was in the small cage. Now he's got a lot of space against a guy with really good footwork, really dangerous counters, and really good defensive wrestling. If Whittaker gets taken down, then he will almost certainly lose the round, at least, in which he's taken down. I do think, however, that he's probably good enough on the ground to survive if he's got like 1 or 2 minutes, if he just plays really defensive. And I think that's the right tack to take. It's just if you get taken down, unless you can immediately stand up without giving up your back, you just prevent Jacare from submitting you. That's the best you can do. Gegard Mousasi did that pretty well. And while Whittaker's not been fighting as long as Mousasi, nor does he have as many submissions, every glimpse I've seen of his ground game has been pretty promising. He had some really nice jiu-jitsu exchanges with Uriah Hall when they fought. It's Uriah Hall, but again, he was really smooth and fluid on the ground. So there are glimmers that he could at least hang on there well enough to keep from being insta-tapped the way lesser fighters have been. And on the feet, I think that even though Jacare is a smart boxer, a powerful striker, the fact that he kind of stalks slowly while throwing very little volume makes me think that Whittaker may kind of have a field day with him. Whittaker is a really mobile, really fast, really powerful boxer. He can throw combinations. He can counter opponents who come in. I think basically we'll have a tale of 2 fights here, where if it goes to the ground, it's Jacare's fight, and if it doesn't, it's Whittaker's. And I think that fact that Whittaker is the younger, fresher fighter and is coming into this fight off a 6-fight win streak with tons of confidence, he may just surprise Jacare with how willing he is to get after him and how hard he is to take down. So I like Robert Whittaker here. I like him by unanimous decision.
God damn it. Damn it.
Did I steal your big surprising upset pick?
Well, it's not even big surprising upset pick. It was I need a way to get back in this shit. I mean,
but now watch, we're both gonna pick Whittaker and then he's gonna lose. So it'll be a wash anyway.
The other part of this to me is that I was kind of being being talked into not picking Whittaker because I picked him on the round table last night and I was the only one that was like, I may change my mind tomorrow. I don't know. This is, you know,
hey man, that's how it was for me with Thiago Alves. Nobody else picked him on the round table, but you saw how that went. You got to go with your gut.
Yeah. And I'm picking Whittaker here. And part of it is just the Tim Boetsch fight was not a very pretty fight for Jacare.
No. He
got clubbed a couple times early in that fight. And eventually the takedown he got was not the classic Jacare, like weaving in on Boetsch and taking him down, because he did duck in and try and take Boetsch down, and Boetsch stuffed it and forced the fight back up and forced Jacare back out to range.
Yeah, he had to catch a kick.
Yeah, he caught a really terrible kick from Tim Boetsch and just kind of slung him down. And Whittaker is a lot fleeter and smarter and craftier and better about stuffing takedowns than Boetsch, and a lot more mobile. And I can't help seeing that and feeling like he can outmaneuver Jacare standing. And Jacare's, you know, his patient, slow, stalk in and land a big shot style of striking, it's good for a lot of fighters it's good for facing guys who are really worried about his takedowns and who are just kind of panicked about fighting him in general, because it doesn't give them anything to work with. Like, he doesn't make mistakes. He doesn't go out and he doesn't do what Derek Brunson does, where at the elite levels, that's just going to keep causing Derek Brunson all sorts of problems, where Jacare, he makes you think a lot about what he's doing as he comes in. But against a striker like Whittaker, who can be mobile, it also just means that Whittaker's going to have a lot to work with. Like, he's not going to be as worried, because he is he's very good at stuffing takedowns. And then he gets somebody who's just going to kind of stalk in and throw a big shot at him, and stalk in and throw a big shot at him. And if he can figure out the right counter to the right punch coming in, he's going to have the opportunity to land. And that makes me like his chances. I'm not as sure that he will not get submitted if Jacare takes him down.
Yeah, I'm definitely not sure about that, by the way. We're talking about Jacare Souza here. Yeah. I only take hope because I like Whittaker's chances, and I look at the fact that even though Jacare was really successful against Gegard Mousasi, it still took him 3 rounds to sink in the choke. So I know that it is possible, if you stay calm, to defend yourself if you play defensively.
Yeah. And so I'm picking Robert Whittaker here too, and I might even pick him by TKO.
Yeah, Jacare
got
dropped badly by Yoel Romero. He's been stung in a few recent fights, and I think mostly he just doesn't get hit as much as he would otherwise, because people are really afraid of getting taken down. But yeah. I think Whittaker has less reason to fear that than a lot of other fighters.
Yeah, and also, yeah, because people too, you know, you hear from people like, oh, well, you saw how Whittaker got swarmed by Derek Brunson, and he can be overwhelmed and hit with hard shots. But that is nothing like how Jacare fights or is going to approach him.
Derek Brunson got obliterated. If you want to have the kind of success Derek Brunson did have, to swarm Whittaker to the point that you can land those shots by overwhelming him, you're going to get hit with a massive counter.
Yeah.
He's a top guy at middleweight, and I think this will be probably the fight that proves that. Even if he loses, I think he will have moments here that sort of establish him as a top 10 middleweight.
So yeah, I'm picking Robert Whittaker too, and I am just ticked off that it doesn't help. It's not going to help me one way or another in this whole thing to give me an edge.
Yeah, we mostly agree on all these.
We are. I think. I don't know. Have we picked one different? Did
No,
you
I
pick
think actually we've
Collier?
agreed. I picked Collier. Yeah, that's our only disagreement there. There's your chance to make it a six fight gap,
God damn it!
or to make it an 8 fight gap, if I'm right.
All right. On that note, Whittaker is the underdog, opening at plus 150 and drifting out to plus 196 now, and Souza opening at minus 190 and dropping quickly to the minus 220 range, now down to minus 240. So I'm actually surprised those lines are getting wider away from Whittaker as the fight gets closer. I mean, I think he wins, and at some point, if he's going to keep being a strong underdog, he's worth betting on as a strong underdog. Maybe. I don't know. I don't bet, so don't take my advice, but you're muted, dude.
My apologies. I think Whittaker's absolutely worth a bet. I think he's got a really solid shot here. I think this should be a lot closer to an even odds fight. And the fact that Jacare is such a comfortable favorite, it means a lot of people are going to be surprised.
Yeah, I especially part of me, like the really non-technical, non-breakdown part of me at all, just there's such a chance for a narrative killer here with Jacare on the last fight of his career, campaigning for this title shot that has just not come at all. And the UFC really doesn't seem to have any interest in giving him a title shot.
They are desperately hoping there will be fewer contenders in the middleweight division because Michael Bisping is busy taking money fights, goddammit.
Yeah, and Whittaker, I could just see Jacare being, like, oh, I'm betting on winning this fight, and then I'll be enter the open market and negotiate with Bellator and the UFC and bounce them off each other. And then he just gets creamed and shoved out the door, and Scott Coker picks him up, and that's the next place we see Jacare.
If things go the way we think they will, then I think it's very likely we see Jacare in Risen by June.
Could be, yeah. Which
that's
would
the
be
place
fun.
for him. Yeah, of course. I mean, I would love to see Jacare just like fighting Japanese pro wrestlers. Why the hell not? It could be good for him, right? I mean, the people will probably pay a lot of money for a guy like Jacare in those promotions. Like, I think Risen would be willing to drop some cash on him, for instance. So it might actually be good for him to lose here because I think he's reaching that point where he can't beat the best guys in the world anymore, where he is starting to slow down with age. But he's still obviously good enough to work anybody below the top 10 level with ease.
It just sucks for him because with Michael Bisping as the champ, you don't have to be young enough to beat the best guys anymore.
He knows he can beat Michael Bisping. He could absolutely dominate Michael Bisping, and there's a very good chance he will never get the shot.
Yep. That brings us to our co-main event, Rose Namajunas, Michelle Waterson. I love this fight. It's a great scrappy fight, and I think it's going to say something really interesting about one of these two women, and it's two women that I have continually feel like have been overhyped in their MMA career to some degree. And I said this on the roundtable, so I am going to repeat myself, as you alluded to earlier. That with Michelle Waterson, there's this sensation like when Michelle Waterson wins, it's usually with some crazy shit that is just like dynamic and crafty, and she's got all these tricks that she's learned from her traditional martial arts base, cobbled together with an exciting jiu-jitsu game. And every time she wins, people are like, Michelle Waterson is obviously like the best woman fighter in the world, and she's about to be champion, and she's this amazing dynamic force, and why is she not the most beloved, championed technical fighter we've ever seen? And Rose Namajunas is obviously still, it was coming off the tough thing and just this air of like Namajunas is going to be the unstoppable force as the great athletic whirlwind fighter within a year. Like she's going to run off the show and beat Carla Esparza and then run up the division, or be this great champion. And then when she lost Carla Esparza, it was still like, well, she'll come right back and improve rapidly and beat the best. And there are distinct reasons that neither of these things is quite true. And with Waterson, it's that and Jordan Breen actually made a better point than I did about this. It's that for every like amazing armbar finish you see Michelle Waterson have, you have to remember in that fight that there were like 9 other armbars that she went for in a really bad position that she didn't get and lost position on and then got beat up for.
Yeah, and almost at least as many submissions that she got caught in and narrowly escaped.
Yeah. She is this amazingly fun to watch, dynamic offensive fighter, but she's constantly throwing herself into trouble and then fighting her way out of it. And standing, she is this fun, creative, offensive striker with very little pop in her strikes. She doesn't sit down on much of anything. And so even when she's throwing these really fast, fun combos where she'll slip and like throw a 1-2 and all that, opponents mostly just tend to shake it off and walk right through it and get after her. And that on the flip side with Namajunas, what I've continue to see is that if Namajunas doesn't feel like she's breaking an opponent, she can be pushed out of success. She will push herself out of her own success. Like if you are not going away, even if she's winning, she will take that as a sign that she needs to try something else. And like nowhere did that show up more than in her Carolina Kowalkiewicz fight, where she was winning that fight from the outside, and then was like, "Well, I'm not. Kowalkiewicz is not going away. I'm not dominating her. I need to push for the clinch. I need to start trying to beat her inside and hook her around and get takedowns." And then Kowalkiewicz just ate her alive inside, and Namajunas could never readjust out of that. And I feel like there's just a little bit of that to her game. I mean, the fact that she dominated Paige Van Zandt is cool, but it also makes, what we've seen out of Paige Van Zandt is that Paige Van Zandt is not the kind of fighter that necessarily takes over a fight and makes you feel challenged if you have the right approach to beat her. Van Zandt was even dropping a fight to Beck Rawlings before catching her with that really impressive flying kick thing. So I wonder if Namajunas cannot break Michelle Waterson quickly, will she throw herself into bad position? Will she push herself out of dominant positions for less dominant ones? And with Waterson, it's kind of a question of, can she survive enough bad positions to get good ones? Because I think Namajunas hits harder standing. So even though Waterson is more technical, more creative, and more varied on the feet, I don't necessarily see Waterson winning a lot of stand-up exchanges. Waterson tends to get hit flush when she trades for more than, when she lands or throws more than a couple shots, she tends to eat a hard shot coming back. And I'm banking on Namajunas being able to control the clinch and control the ground grappling game when it goes there, especially with how out of control Waterson can get in grappling exchanges. But if Waterson's ground game is tightened up, and like what we saw out of her against Angela Magana and Paige Van Zandt was an incredibly dominant grappling performances. If that has tightened up a bit for Waterson, there's a chance that Namajunas could find herself not having as much success as she wants standing, and then driving herself into a scramble where Waterson comes out ahead. And I feel like Waterson has a chance to catch Namajunas out on the ground, but Namajunas is the fighter that I have a little more faith in moment to moment, minute to minute, just for her power and for her own strong positional grappling attack and ground and pound. So I'm picking Namajunas here, but a win for either woman, I feel like, could tell us a lot about how much they've changed recently.
Yeah.
So
I want to say one. I'm going to slightly disagree with one thing that you said about Rose Namajunas, because I want to talk about her sort of mental struggles, which I think are a very real and very relevant part of why she fights the way she does. I thought the situation with Kolokiewicz was not merely that Namajunas was not like instantly getting the finish. I think Kolokiewicz was giving her significant pushback. I think it was once Kolokiewicz started to get into the clinch and beat her up a little bit, that then Namajunas is like, well, now I have to dominate the clinch. Then she started to lose her edge. You know, she started to kind of get a little fretful. I think if it was just any kind of adversity, that Rose Namajunas, like the Rose Namajunas who lost to Carla Esparza, may very well have lost to Paige Van Zandt. And not because Paige Van Zandt was having any success at all, but because Rose Namajunas spent 4 rounds being unable to finish Paige Van Zandt. And I think the younger Namajunas, that would have been when she was like more of a clone of someone like Anthony Johnson, as far as her mental issues go. That would have been enough. Like when Rumble doesn't knock you out, he hurts his own confidence by thinking too much that he has to get the finish. And I thought it was an important step for Namajunas that when she fought Van Zandt, she said after the fight, she was like, I almost got frustrated because I wasn't getting her out of there. And I thought, you know what? You're winning the fight. Just keep doing what you're doing and the finish will come, or it won't, and you'll win. And
I will say slightly, like, my thing is I'm not saying that Namajunas needs to be like absolutely knocking somebody out or something like that. It's that I think she needs to feel like she's winning.
Yeah, I think she has expanded the criteria for what feels like I'm winning feels like, right? Because like the fight with Tisha Torres was really scrappy and she hung in there. And then the fight with Kolokiewicz was fairly competitive. She definitely faltered, but I thought that the Namajunas who fought Carla Esparza would have definitely faltered a lot more.
Kolokiewicz is, as we've now realized, absolutely unfucking breakable when it comes to confidence.
Goddamn maniac. Like, she will not stop trying to get after you no matter what you do. And that's always going to be a type of opponent that is very difficult for Rose. But, you know, Namajunas is 24. Yeah. She's been fighting since 2013 as a pro. She's very inexperienced, and she's done pretty much all of her developing on the biggest stages in the world. She debuted against an established fighter in Emily Kagan, and in just 8 fights, she's fought Tisha Torres twice, Carla Esparza, Angela Hill, Paige Van Zandt, and Karolina Kowalkiewicz. Like, she has fought top-notch fighters since the beginning, and it's tough. I mean, that's why I think anyone who looks at Rose Namajunas' 5-3 record and says, "Oh, like, how is she a contender?" is kidding themselves, because she's fighting the best. And you can say a similar thing about Michelle Waterson. You know, I think that Rose Namajunas can still be shaken by a fighter like Waterson. I do think Waterson has some real pop in her kicks, and because she relies on kicks and she's quite good at throwing them even on the retreat, she could do some damage to Rose Namajunas on the feet. Rose is very boxing centric, very committed to the idea of staying basic, staying tight with her fundamentals. And at times against more like dynamic, unpredictable fighters, that has kind of seen her get picked apart a little bit. Tisha Torres landed a lot of low kicks on her.
I kind of feel like Torres beat Namajunas.
I think that's a perfectly reasonable position to take. It was a close fight, and I also felt like Torres probably deserved the nod, though I wasn't upset that Namajunas got it. But Waterson can do that. The problem with Waterson is that I think her style is really, really high energy. I think in a lot of ways she's kind of similar to Rose, that she's definitely a little more willing to like engage in back and forth scrambles, but I think she is a bit of a front runner too. Tends to sort of break down as the fight goes on, and more profound, because she, as you said, is like on this hyper aggressive level with her grappling, where she's very technical. Like Michelle Waterson's a good grappler. She's really good in scrambles. She's very difficult to hold down, but she is just always looking to attack, and she often puts herself into really bad positions. And I think there is going to be a serious technical and just sort of strategic disparity between these two on the ground, because where Waterson looks like a really good blue belt, Rose Namajunas looks like a black belt. She will just float on top of you as you scramble around underneath her, focus on gaining position. It's kind of like, I think we talked about this with like Borg versus Smolka when we previewed that fight. Like the dynamic grappler, two equally dynamic grapplers, one of whose focus is to secure position, where the other one is willing to give up position. And it's going to be tough, I think, on the ground for Michelle Waterson to, unless she catches Rose Namajunas out with something really surprising, which she can do, it's going to be tough for her to like consistently win scrambles on the ground. And you add into that the fact that Namajunas is a bigger fighter. I think she's probably the stronger fighter. She's got a great frame for this division, and I think she's been putting on muscle over time. I don't know if you've it's always a treat to follow the Instagram accounts of like Namajunas and Pat Barry, Hyperdie, but Namajunas is looking pretty thick these days. Like she's putting on muscle as she grows into her body, and her game is adapting to that. I think one of the biggest things, obviously her boxing has stood out as something that's improved pretty dramatically, but I think her wrestling has also gotten a lot better. Namajunas, she couldn't handle Kovalkiewicz in the clinch, but she might have been able to if she was a little less frazzled. And against lesser wrestlers, she's been really effective getting sort of like dump and trip takedowns from the clinch position. She wrestles like a tall fighter should. And Michelle Waterson is like the queen of the risky wrestling technique. It's like sacrifice throws and wild rolls, like Granby rolls to escape a body lock, and head and arm throws, of course. Namajunas doesn't really do a lot of that. She's very secure. She's stable. She's strong. I think that while Waterson will have some success at range and may, in fact, sort of pick Rose apart there, once this gets into the clinch and onto the ground, Namajunas' technical edge is going to show, and it doesn't hurt that she's a natural strawweight where Michelle Waterson is 5'3". You know, she's pretty small for the division. I'm sure she doesn't have to cut much weight at all to make the 115-pound limit. So I like Namajunas. I think
Waterson has also put on some muscle recently.
That's true. Yeah, she's. I think she's more comfortable now, and I think she did have to cut a lot of weight to make atom weight before. But I think it'll be scrappy. I think both women have a good shot. It's not an easy fight to call, but I think those little edges in the grappling department will be enough for Namajunas to squeak out. Let's see, actually, did I say decision in my preview or submission? I got to stay consistent, Zane. I took her by third round submission. I think Waterson's going to start to slow down and get a little too wild in those scrambles and get caught in something.
All right. On that note, Namajunas is the favorite, opening at -135 and now out at -144. These odds have moved up and down a bit. That line's seen a bit of movement, but she's stayed a consistent favorite throughout. And Waterson, the underdog, opening at -105. In fact, so these odds opened at even, and now out to +120.
I think that's fine.
Yeah, that feels all right to me. It's an incredibly close fight that could end up, especially if Namajunas does not get the submission, it could be every round could be close.
Yeah, and if Waterson is like beats her up enough on the feet, who knows? Like Namajunas might lose a little bit and go a little crazy. And
yeah,
if Waterson does seize the initiative, she's good at keeping it.
Yeah, it'll be an interesting one. Let's see. That brings us to our main event now: Demetrious Johnson versus Wilson Hayes.
Well, the first thing I want to say here is that thank God the UFC in their latest promo for this finally decided to just advertise the fact that Demetrious Johnson is unbeatable, because they haven't done nearly enough of that. And That's the selling point with Demetrious Johnson. If you want to get people to care about him, it would help not to bury all of his contenders on the Fight Pass prelims, because even after they decided they wanted to make Wilson Reis the next challenger, and that fight fell through, they had an opportunity to get a little hype for Wilson Reis, and they had him fight Uluka Sasaki on the Fight Pass prelims. So I don't know what the hell they're doing. They clearly still have very little interest in really getting people to care about the flyweight division, but telling people, hey, Demetrious Johnson is unbeatable. He's going to tie the record for title defenses in the UFC if he wins this fight. And let's see another guy try to beat him. Let's see if the impossible can be done. That's the way to sell a guy who doesn't look like anyone can beat him, who has just cleaned out his division. You just tell people that he's cleaned out his division, and we're hoping like someone's going to have to really cause a miracle to beat him. As for the fight, I think, Wilson Reis does have some edges here. Wilson Reis he's undeniably one of the best guys at flyweight. He's been a top guy for a long time. He's got a lot of valuable experience, and I think his game is continuing to improve, especially in regards to his striking. He definitely got pieced up a little bit in that fight with Uluka Sasaki, but once he got his takedowns working, he then started to outstrike Sasaki as well as out wrestling him. When his whole game is working in concert, he's a very solid, very well-rounded fighter. And he's especially dominant with his wrestling and with his submission grappling. And Demetrious Johnson is not impossible to take down. He's actually, I think he only has like 66% takedown defense, which is surprisingly low considering what a good wrestler he is. He is, however, very difficult to hold down, and he's also very difficult to secure in any kind of position. Sometimes people with really strong submission games have managed to catch Demetrious Johnson in a bad position on the ground, just as people catch him in bad positions on the feet, because I think he is still at heart a guy who knows that he's like fast and explosive enough to scramble free, and so that means sometimes he makes mistakes when he's on the defensive. Tim Elliott caught him in some submissions. Joe Benavidez came very close to submitting him with the guillotine, and Ian McCall had a lot of success quite a while ago now, but holding him in a position on the ground and beating him up. So Wilson Reis has some opportunities there. To do it, however, I think he's going to have to pressure Demetrious Johnson, who more and more is sort of announcing himself as a pressure fighter, somebody who likes to walk his opponents down, force them into the clinches, just make them react to him. Because I said this on Heavy Hands, but when you're fighting, like Demetrious Johnson he's a combat computer. He is the ultimate flowchart adaptive fighter in the sport. He's going to adapt. So you know that when you fight him, like whatever I show him, he's going to get used to it and find a way to counter it. So you have a choice. You can allow him to adapt to your defense. You can allow him to the time and space he needs to figure out ways to get past your defense, or you can make him adapt to your offense. And I think the latter is a much safer option for just about anybody, because Demetrious Johnson is still kind of hittable, and it's much better to be able to control the fight and make him react rather than letting him have the initiative when he just, like, seemingly on the fly puts together the perfect game plan to beat you by round 3. The problem with that is that pressuring Demetrious Johnson means matching Demetrious Johnson's pace. And Tim Elliott couldn't do it. Tim Elliott had a lot of success early, being a big guy who was just swarming. We saw how effective the pressure could be. But by round 3, Tim Elliott was dead tired. And Demetrious Johnson doesn't get tired. Like, even in that fight, he could have probably gone another 5 rounds, especially as Elliott continued to slow down. And that was the most tired I've seen him in a long, long time, because he had to really fight back hard in the early going. I don't see Wilson Reis being capable, not being much of a pressure fighter to start with. I don't see him being capable of fighting against type so effectively that he can take 3 rounds in the beginning. And even if he does, I think he will tire himself out significantly by about the midpoint of the fight, at which point Demetrious Johnson could take over. More likely, I think Demetrious Johnson's going to start to take over near the end of the first round and kind of start to have his way with Wilson. He's going to have to watch his neck on the ground. He's going to have to be careful in the scrambles and watch out for the reactive shots. But if he can maintain distance control, if he can keep the initiative, I think we're probably looking at Demetrious Johnson by some sort of a clinch TKO in like round 3 or 4.
Yeah, I feel very much the same, and I would also add that I think what we've seen out of his fights against Tim Elliott and any other and Kyoji Horiguchi, who are the only people recently to have had a lot of success against Demetrious Johnson, is that you kind of have to be able to, striking wise, you have to be able to pressure and be creative to take Demetrious to get any success against DJ. Like, you have to be able to go after him with a variety that his computer brain is not ready for. Like, where Tim Elliott would just throw, like, right hand, high kick, jab, high kick, leg kick. And, like, you never knew what stage or where Tim Elliott was going to come when he was pressuring.
Yeah, that's how you deal with the computer, right? You give it like a million equations in the space of 5 seconds, so it just has to reset.
Yeah. And nothing about that is what Wilson Hayes does.
No.
Wilson Hayes is a very rote boxer. He's got power. He's got speed. He's got some decent form. He's also very hittable early when he does not have his takedown game going. So he can't rely much on his striking early in fights because, as we saw with the Sasaki fight and as we've seen in other fights, including his fight with Hector Sandoval as well, before fighters are worried about his takedowns, he's very mechanical, head-on line, coming straight after you, gets hit hard.
He has to make you worry about takedowns before he can stop worrying about being hit. And
exactly.
And it's not like it doesn't make sense for him to worry a little bit about being hit because he doesn't have the greatest chin in the world. No. He's been like flash KO'd and flash knocked down in a few fights. And Demetrious Johnson, maybe not the hardest hitter, but he's not actually that bad of a knockout artist since his championship reign began.
And on the flip side of that too, so the other part we've seen, as we saw in the Tim Elliott fight, is if you're going to cause Johnson trouble on the ground, you either have to be big enough to be able to just get a position and lock it on him, or you have to be creative enough to just attack him at any moment where he doesn't expect it. I mean, that's what Tim Elliott had, both of those things. He was big enough to be able to get positions and hold them. And he was also willing to just, like, yeah, you're on my back, but watch if I wriggle a little, I can suddenly try for an arm triangle. And then you're like, how the hell did you even find a submission attempt there? You're on top of me. I'll throw up an arm bar at any moment. Whatever.
It was also the small cage.
Yeah.
Easier for him to put that pressure on.
Yeah. It was just sort of whenever he had a chance to attack in whatever position he was in, Tim Elliott was trying to attack Demetrious Johnson. And it was more trouble for Johnson than most people have been, than anyone lately has been on the ground. Wilson Hayes is a position first black belt top control grappler. He needs to take you down, be on top of you. He's going to cut to pass guard, and then he's going to force you to choose whether you want to open up an arm triangle or a rear naked choke.
Yeah.
He needs to be able to go through the steps and the processes of a position-based grappling game, a lockdown grappling game. And there's almost no way Demetrious Johnson gives him the opportunities to move from position to position and to lock those positions down. Like, that's just not something that Johnson is likely to allow at all. And so it does not give me a lot of faith that Wilson Hayes' effective offense is going to have many avenues. So it's really a question of how long does his defense keep him alive in this fight? And could be third, fourth round. Could be earlier. Really depends, but that's really my only question. On Odds on this fight, Demetrious Johnson opened at -833, briefly dipped down to -956, and has actually been trending back up to -767. So, not really sure why, but there you have it.
Some people are seeing how wide the odds are, and they just can't resist the bet.
I guess, yeah. And on the flip side, Wilson Hayes opened at +450, got out as high as +578, and is now drifting back down to 523. Whatever, anything, anything near -1,000 +500 is pretty much right for this fight. So
yeah, it was I even saw, I mean, just to corroborate what I said, I saw some people on Reddit who are the guys like, I really think Wilson Hayes is gonna like knock Demetrious Johnson out in the first round. Or you know how there's always like 1% of fans who make the ridiculous predictions so they can scream about how they told you so if it does happen. And people are like, you should bet on it. And he was like, that's good advice. And I was like, that's bad advice. That is terrible. The opposite of good advice, because like, even if it happens, it will not retroactively become good advice, because at this point, unless he's fighting like Cody Garbrandt or like Magomed Bibulatov in 2 years and he makes a lot of improvements, there is no reason to pick the average flyweight contender, as good as they are, against Demetrious Johnson.
And Wilson Hayes isn't even on, like, he's not even an elite flyweight contender. He's not John Dodson. He's not Joseph Benavidez.
Yeah, he's certainly not as dangerous.
Or Kyoji Horiguchi.
Certainly not as dangerous as those guys. And also, it's also worth pointing out before we wrap up that Wilson Hayes, even for a flyweight, has an abysmal knockout rate. He has never scored a knockout in his entire career, and he's been fighting for quite a while. So he really has
knocked anyone out, and he hasn't fought in a 5-round fight since like 2008.
Yeah, that's true. He's been on Fight Pass prelims, so he's just been in 3-round bouts. He has one avenue to victory here, and if you think that Demetrious Johnson can't deal with one avenue to victory, like in 99 times out of 100, then I guess put money on Wilson Hayes. It's your loss.
Final question before we close the show is at +140 is under 3.5 rounds worth a look?
Maybe. Is that what are the odds for it?
Johnson inside the distance.
That's worth a look. Yeah, I think Johnson inside the distance at underdog odds is definitely worth a look. This is a guy who has finished a slight majority of his 9 title defenses. It's not like he's facing the most durable fighter that he has challenged yet. And even guys who are durable, like Henry Cejudo is a tough, durable guy. He can take a shot. And he couldn't take Demetrious Johnson's shots once Demetrious started, flowing in the clinch. So I think there's a very real possibility that Demetrious knocks out or even submits Wilson Hayes if he really slows down in the later rounds. So, yeah, I think that might be worth a look.
All right. Well, on that note, you can find me on Twitter at TheZaneSimon. You can find Connor on Twitter at BoxingBush. You can find both of us over at BloodyElbow.com. Give us a like on YouTube. That's the thumbs up thing. That helps us a ton. And subscribe to our YouTube channel, MMANation.com. DOTCOM. That's where you get all the latest Bloody Elbow shows, videos, interviews, analysis, all that good stuff. I will be back for the 6th round after the fights this weekend. And then we will be back next week for UFC Fight Night Swanson versus Lobov. And we will have If I Did It, Care Don't Care, Vivisection, Heavy Hands, all that good stuff for that. So stay tuned, and we will see you next time.